Well, Mr. Verona, thank you very much for that introduction. Appreciate it very much. President Monti and the executive board, thank you for inviting me here today. It's an honor to be in front of you, and the crowd is a little bit intimidating, so it's my pleasure to be here, and hopefully I have some things to share with you that will be of value. I have to make a very small confession. I hope it's okay. I thought this was going to be a Q&A conversation, and I was asked to give a lecture. So I'm going to do my best, and I thought I'd divide the lecture into three parts. The Starbucks story, the world we're living in today, and our individual and collective responsibility going forward, given the challenges that we are all witnessing in terms of our society and how it's changing. Let me begin with Starbucks. In 1987, Starbucks had 11 stores and 100 people working for the company. And we had this dream to create a national brand of coffee in America. And as Mr. Verona said, that dream in many ways started with my first trip as a young man when I came to Milan for the first time in 1983. And I walked the streets of Milan and Verona, and I was captured emotionally by the Italian coffee bar, the sense of community, the third place between home and work, and I raced back to America thinking, this is what I'd like to try and do and transform the Italian coffee experience into the American society. So in '87, when we had 11 stores and 100 employees, we started thinking about how we could do that. And we had two big ideas. One was, what is going to be the customer experience in terms of the theater, the romance, how the stores were going to look and feel. But the second, perhaps, was most important, and that is, what is going to be the culture, the values, and guiding principles of the company? And we set out to try and create a different kind of business model, one that was very different at the time and has served us very, very well. And that is, could we possibly create a business model that would achieve the fragile balance between profit and benevolence? Could we create shareholder value and at the same time social impact? And that business model really was the foundation for everything we've been able to do today, which is 25,000 stores, 330,000 employees who we call partners, 91 million customers last week going through our stores, and Starbucks is in 75 countries, including 2,600 stores in China, and we open a store every day in that country. But the success of Starbucks is based on a philosophy that success is best when it's shared. Now, where did that come from, and why do I feel so strongly about that? And it's very personal. I grew up in public housing in Brooklyn, New York. I don't know what the Italian translation is to public housing, but it's government-assisted housing. And I grew up in a family that had very, very little and was a poor kid. And I was scarred by those experiences and felt embarrassed and shamed about what I was seeing, what I was witnessing, and something happened to me when I was 7 years old. That was a defining moment. My father was a truck driver, and he had a series of very, very bad jobs. And this one job he had was maybe the worst one. And he was delivering and picking up cloth diapers before the invention of Pampers. And in 1960, on a cold winter day, he was doing his job and he fell on a sheet of ice and broke his leg and his hip. And in 1960 in America, if you were an uneducated worker and you got hurt on the job, you were dismissed, you were fired. And that's what happened to my father. So I came home from school at 7 years old and walked into my apartment where we lived, and my father was laying on a couch with a cast from his hip to his ankle, no job, no health insurance, no workman's compensation, no future. And I witnessed in those defining, imprinting years the fracturing of a family. And I saw it, and it scarred me. Now, I never imagined that one day this kid from public housing would be in a position to build or run a company. But I always had this feeling and this sensibility about people who were living on the other side of the tracks. So when, in 1987, we were starting the company, what did we do? For the first time, Starbucks became the first company in America to provide comprehensive health insurance to every single employee. And that was 25 years ahead of President Obama's Affordable Care Act. We were the first one. Well, we did it not because of marketing or a press release. We did it because it was the right thing for humanity and the right thing for our people. 2 years later, Starbucks was starting to experience some success, and we had an eye that in 1992 we would become a public company. And before we became a public company, the second big idea was, how could we create an opportunity in which everyone in the company could become a shareholder? Whether you were a part-time worker, whether you were working in our factory, wherever you were in the company, you could become a shareholder. And so we became the first company in America to give equity in the form of stock options to every single employee, and we still do that today. And we did that in 1989 before we went public. So the health insurance and the equity in the form of stock options began to create what I think is the most important characteristic of building a great, enduring company, and that is the currency of trust between you and the people who do the work. And I'll say it a different way. If managers and leaders want to exceed the expectations of your customers, the only way you can do that is if, as managers and leaders, you're going to exceed the expectations of your people, so they can exceed the expectations of the customer. Now, in those years, we were a small company, and we had big dreams about the future. Now, if someone told me today that I'd be standing in front of all of you and talking about the size and scale of Starbucks and getting ready to open up in Italy, and Starbucks would become one of the great iconic companies of America and perhaps the world, I would have said, no, I don't think so. I don't know how that's going to happen. But when I'm tested, really tested, and someone says, how did you do it? How did it happen? It happened because at the core of what we do, we are sourcing and roasting the highest quality Arabica coffee in the world. We have perhaps the best real estate portfolio of any retailer anywhere in the world. And the design of our stores are really beautiful and unique. But all of that is subordinate to the secret of success, which is culture, values, guiding principles, and the understanding of humanity. And threaded into all of that is recognizing that the balance of achieving profit and social impact is linked to believing and executing against a strategy in which success is shared. Success is shared. And so, as we look at the company today, we are involved in lots of things that are very uncharacteristic and somewhat unorthodox because the world has changed. And I believe that the role and responsibility for a private company and a for-profit public company in America, where we live, or anywhere in the world today, has changed. That the rules of engagement, of responsibility, have changed. We can't rely on government. We can't rely on elected officials. We have to look at the citizenry and understand what is our individual and collective responsibility. So in the last 4 or 5 years, Starbucks has taken on social issues specifically in America, that were so taboo, untouchable. Or as one person recently said to me, Howard, that's the third rail. You can't touch it. During the Obama administration, we had a high level of unemployment. And we noticed that the banks, after the financial crisis in 2009, was not lending money to small businesses. And we said, what is our responsibility in all of this? And of course, we're a coffee company. Our responsibility is nothing compared to what the responsibility to the government or the bank. But we said, no. We have stores in every community in America. We see there's so many people unemployed. What can we do? So we started a campaign of raising money with our customers that we matched, in which we would provide loans to small businesses that they could not get access to through a local bank. You can understand that there were shareholders at Starbucks, public shareholders, who were starting to call us up saying, what are you doing? You're in a coffee business. Sell coffee. Make money. Well, here's the secret. I don't believe that you can build a great, enduring company anywhere in the world where profit is your sole objective. I also believe that young people around the world today, just like yourselves, want to work for a company whose values are values that you believe in and that you trust. So we want to attract the smartest people. We want to retain them. And I sit in our boardroom and our management team room, and I think about 2 empty chairs in that room. One empty chair is a customer, and one empty chair is a Starbucks employee who we call partner, because everyone is an owner. And metaphorically, I ask myself all the time, is this decision that we're about to make going to make the customer or our partner proud? And if the answer is a resounding yes, we know we're on the right track. If the answer is somewhat gray, then perhaps we need to continue to debate it. And if it stays gray, we shouldn't do it. Let me give you an example. In the last couple of years in America, we have witnessed something that we have not seen since 1965 through 1970. And that is the rise of significant racism in America against African Americans. And we watched this unfold. And we came to work one day and we said, we want to have a company-wide meeting. Company-wide. And we want to talk about racism and bigotry in an environment just like this, with no speeches. Just give people an opportunity to talk and share. And people said, Howard, you can't talk about race at work. Why? Why can't we? So we had a company-wide meeting about race, and then we had 11 more around the country. And I heard things that I could not believe from African American Starbucks people. In St. Louis, Missouri, where there was the terrible tragedy in Ferguson, a young man, 18 years old, handsome young black man, stood up, Starbucks person, and he said one sentence. He said, Mr. Schultz, I'm 18, and I don't think I'm going to make it to 19. Sat down. And we heard stories like that all over. What should we do? So we said, we have to do something about this. We have to speak up. We have to speak up. So we started this incredible campaign called Race Together in America. And we wrote Race Together on millions of cups. And we got vilified by social media and vilified by the press that any company would try and start a conversation about race in America or think that we were above the law and we could preach about race. When in fact, we weren't preaching. We were trying to elevate the national conversation. Why? In 1968, it was a terrible, terrible tragedy in America. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And one of the great, great speeches of all time occurred in Indianapolis by Robert F. Kennedy, President Kennedy's younger brother. He was campaigning to become president, and he was making a campaign stop in Indianapolis. His plane lands, and as the plane lands, he's literally told, as he's coming off the steps, Mr. Kennedy, go back on the plane. People are rioting in the streets. Martin Luther King was just assassinated. They had to make a choice. And the choice was about leadership. The choice was about character. The choice was about moral courage. He went down the steps and he said, cancel my campaign stop, but take me to the place where people are rioting. And his advisor said, Mr. Kennedy, you cannot go to that place. It's all black people. They're rioting in the streets. You can't go there. It's not safe for you. He said, take me there. He went there, and he stood on the back of a truck. He didn't have any notes. It's only 10, 15 minutes from the time he was told of the tragedy. He had no microphone, and he stood up. And he gave one of the great, great speeches of our generation. Go to YouTube and watch it. But his message was about 3 words. 3 words. And I would submit, given the environment that we are in today, that these words are more relevant today, sadly, than on the evening of Martin Luther King's assassination. Because he asked for 3 things. He asked for compassion, he asked for empathy, and he talked about love. One city in America that night did not have rioting. Indianapolis. Because he talked about the human condition. And here we are today with such divisiveness, such hatred, such bigotry, vitriolic statements coming from elected officials, and such a fracturing of trust and confidence in people who we used to look up to as the people with the answers. And there is a great need, whether you are Italian, American, German, Russian, Islamic, Jewish, Catholic, Christian, black, white, male, female, gay, straight, transgender. There's a great, great need for love, humanity, and compassion. And the question for all of us, whether you are a student in Italy or a professor or a Starbucks barista, is what is our responsibility in all this? And history has demonstrated time and time again that one of the evils of the world is indifference. This is not a time to be indifferent. This is a time for moral courage. This is a time to demonstrate your conviction. This is a time to stand up tall for things that are just and right, and stand up against things that we all know are unjust. This is also a time in the world where we can't allow so many walls to be built that divide us. This is a time to build bridges and to extend ourselves to one another, to embrace our differences, and not to allow ourselves to get caught up in thinking or believing that one voice or a collective voice can't make a positive difference in a world that desperately, desperately requires the kind of leadership that young people today can provide. Now, just a few months ago, we had an opportunity to open up a store in South Africa. I had never been to South Africa. I'd read a lot about it, and certainly we all have read with great admiration and respect what Nelson Mandela has meant to that country and to the world. So I was looking forward to it with great anticipation. Before we opened the 2 stores in Johannesburg, I had an opportunity to sit down with about 50 young people who were going to wear the green apron and work for Starbucks. And it turns out, unbeknownst to me, all 50 of them had never had a job. Their first job. Their excitement and their self-esteem was just extraordinary about the opportunity to serve customers. And as we're talking, they're telling me about where they live. And they're telling me they live in a township. I never heard of a township, never visited a township, but I asked one of them, would it be okay if after work today, I went with you to see where you live? And he was so proud to say, yes, of course. I went to the township, and as I said, I grew up in public housing. I was a poor kid. I have never seen poverty like this. A township is a group of tin, square, 50 meters, maybe even less. No running water, no electricity, no kitchen. And yet, I met his mother, I met his sister, and Victor's family was so joyful, so happy. What I was struck by was, I know a lot of people who are very successful, who are really pissed off, really unhappy, like envious. And here's this family. They have nothing except each other. Getting back to that conversation with those 50 young kids, they kept using a word, an Afrikaans word I had never heard before. And they used it time and time again, and finally I got enough nerve to say, you keep saying this word, what does it mean? The word was Ubuntu, Ubuntu. U-B-U-N-T-U, Ubuntu. Victor, what does Ubuntu mean? Puts a big smile on his face. They're all smiling. And he says, Ubuntu means, I am because of you. I am because of you. This is a time in the world where that word, Ubuntu, means so much because we need to be for each other. So I leave you with that word, Ubuntu, with the understanding that we need to be very mindful of the world we're living in, the individual and collective responsibility we all have to each other, our families, our friends, our society, and to do everything we can not to be a bystander, to be an upstander, to make a difference, and to recognize that we are living right now in a global society where people are going to be asking us, our children, our grandchildren, where were you back then? What were you doing? What did you stand up for? What did you defend? So I ask you, on behalf of your parents who have sent you to this extraordinary university so that your life will be better than them, to do everything you can to make them proud of what you're going to do in your society, in your neighborhood, in your community, to make them proud and make a difference. Thank you very much. Thank you.